Those of you who've been around the last 2.5 years know that I, every once in a while, just like to do something off script. So last year, you got to listen in once a month for 12 months on letters I wrote to my kids back in the year 2000 about things I hoped they were catching from me, but wasn't quite sure I was around enough to let them catch them. So I decided to write them a series of letters and have it bound in a book and give it to them to lose. So this year, rather than do that, I thought, well, let's spend some time every other month or so on the 6 chief parts. I worked with a pastor years ago who liked to do little cartoons, and so he had a pastor looking kind of sternly across his desk at a young boy confirmation class, and the pastor saying, "No, Billy, we don't refer to the 6 chief parts as Luther's six-pack." And so we won't refer to them that way, although I kind of like it. Exodus 20, verses 1 through 7, the primary place we usually will go right to for a recitation of what we know as the 10 Commandments, where Moses is on the mount and God gives him these commandments etched into tablets of stone. They're repeated again in Deuteronomy 5. Deuteronomy is that book that is a pastor's dream because Moses is preaching for 32 chapters. Someday. But then it would be a lot like, I think, Beethoven's Disappearing Symphony, where the symphony's playing away, and then one by one, each instrument has a candle, and they blow their candle out, pick up their instrument, and walk off. I've never seen that one performed in live. I'd love to, but I kind of think I'd be preaching to an empty church by the time I got to chapter 4, let alone 32. But there in Deuteronomy, and that'll come into play, Moses reviews for the people their entire history and the Lord's history with them, because when you're talking to or about or as the people of God, you can't review your history and not be also reviewing the history of the Lord with you. He always has been Emmanuel, God with us, and he was always God with his ancient people as well. And Moses does something in the recitation of the law of the Lord through the book of Deuteronomy that hopefully, if I remember, we'll get to at the close. We summarize the 2 tables of the law. I grew up in my early years in and around Mellon, Wisconsin, a tiny little town way up by Lake Superior, at Emmanuel Lutheran Church there. And over the pulpit, on the wall over the pulpit, were the 2 tablets of stone. And on the one tablet was Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3, and on the other one, Roman numerals 4 through 10. Even as a kid, it bugged me that there weren't 5 on a side. That lack of symmetry didn't, and I have no artistic ability at all, but I wanted that at least numerical symmetry there above the pastor's head. Never happened, but later I discovered, there's an actual reason for that. Those first 3 commandments, the first table of the law, describe our relationship with the Lord. And the second set, those 6 commandments, or 7, our relationship with one another. Now, I did mention in the early service that in some of the Reformed tradition and actually the Roman Catholic tradition, there are still 10 commandments, but the first table has 4. They separate the first one into 2 and combine the last 2 into 1. So if you ever see them listed that way, it's okay. It's all in the Bible there. But so the summary of the first table of the law. Anyone want to color in the lines? Mine, by the way, was the one all scribbly. That's kind of the way. Okay. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. I am taking this stuff today out of that version of the catechism that Mary lifted up there briefly, the ones the kids are using today. Some of you maybe, I don't know, is there anyone old enough here to have had the old orange one back in the 40s? Mine was that blue one, and we had interlead, so it was really thick. We could take notes on every page, and believe me, our pastor gave us notes to put in there. Right down to someday I'm going to teach you how to pronounce the word trespass, by the way. But that's another sermon. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the second is like it, Jesus said, the summary of the second table of the law, love your neighbor as yourself. An important thing to remember as the children of Israel came to Mount Sinai, camped around it for 11 months or so there, waited for Moses to come back down the mountain, blew it with Aaron, and made a golden calf. And then Moses comes down and breaks and all of that. And all of that, they were already the people of the Lord. Don't understand that the commandments were given so if you obey these, then you're God's children. They came as his children already. These commandments are summaries, really, of God's vision for the best possible way to live as his children, to live in relationship with him, and to live in relationship with one another. They don't make us his children. We are already that. But it's the vision of God's heart for the best possible way to live that out. So the first commandment, you shall have no other gods. Israel was unique in the religious history of humankind in devoting itself to one God, in understanding, in fact, that there is only one God. They had some problems with maintaining practice of that, as you likely well know. We don't worship Baal or Asherah or all those folks too much anymore, but we let other stuff get in the way and capture our attention and even the devotion of our energies, even our spiritual energies sometimes. So this is still a good reminder for us, God's vision. There's one God, and this one God has created us, loves us, redeems us, and desires to walk with us. Whether it's in the cool of the garden on a summer afternoon, or if it's in the hot trenches of a difficult season of life, there is God with us. Always, always, always with us, for us. A second commandment, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Israel was also unique in terms of its religious document in actually getting the name of the Lord. That's no small thing for Moses. I think Moses thought it was a deal breaker there, talking to God out of that seemingly burning bush. When he finally came on, he kept trying to get out of doing what the Lord wanted him to do. And so he finally figures out, this is a deal breaker. What's your name? Because they're going to want to know. And for God to give his name, not just another word for divinity, but his actual name, I think Moses didn't think he'd do it. But he did. I am Yahweh. I am. And you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. To give away your name in that culture, whether it was a god or another person, was to give part of your identity and power over you, to give you the right to call on the name, and so that person. God gives Moses and so Israel and us today the right to call on his name, to use his name, but not to misuse it. And a third commandment relating to our relationship with God, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. That concept of Sabbath is an important one. We are a restless people sometimes. Even on Sundays, we'll have a long to-do list. This idea of God intentionally placing into the lives of his people a gift, a one-day gift, which, by the way, was unique among the ancient peoples of God as well. Those folks toiled 7 days a week, often as slaves. But God gives his people a day, a Sabbath, a rest day, even as he rested and sanctified that day. And he invites them to observe it. Marvin Dawn and others, Christian writers, contemporary and not so contemporary, continually place before us today the value of rest, the value of Sabbath, a resting in and a devotion to the Lord. And then we move to the second table of the law. This was my mother's favorite commandment to recite. My father was often gone for weeks, even months at a time, the kinds of things he did as we were young. And we would hear this one, and when my mother recited, this particular commandment, it was always said something like this: honor your father and your mother. She always seemed to emphasize that word mother, or maybe I just heard it that way. I don't know. But honor them. Luther, in his explanation to this commandment, notice I haven't freighted it. I did a series on the 10 Commandments years ago in a previous church. You know, it was one commandment a Sunday, but it was over the course of the summer, and so a VBS Sunday showed up and Vacation Sunday showed up. Long about the middle of September, one guy came out of church, he goes, how many commandments are there? I thought there were only 10. You know, so I'm kind of racing through them all today, but my guess is it's okay with you. Honor your father and your mother. This life we live together, this second table of the law begins here in that relationship we have with one another in the family. Luther, in his explanation, some of you may know, some of you are learning this one, with this one, extends it to respecting those in authority in general, even in the culture. And then a fifth commandment, you shall not murder. The old blue catechism I grew up with was you shall not kill. This is a more accurate rendition of the Hebrew there. You shall not murder. We are respecters of life. Sixth commandment. You shall not commit adultery. You know, we're so steeped in just the life of the church and our relationship with the Lord and with one another. You kind of wonder, why do you even need to tell people this one? But it's that part of relating to one another that respects, encourages, and supports one another's most intimate relationships and never does anything to get in the way of those, to destroy those, but always acts to respect, support, and encourage them. And a seventh commandment, you shall not steal. Again, this respect that underlies all of this second table of the law, this way of relating to one another, it's foundational, right down to the stuff people have, which for some odd reason, even I will admit, when we saw that 66 fastback Mustang yesterday, Philip, moving, first thing we both said when we got out of the car, our cars later was, did you see that car? And now, it isn't as good as the 63 Corvette, which is my personal dream car, in case any of you are looking ahead to Christmas. But it was pretty cool, and I was a little envious. And eighth commandment, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. Bear false witness was the language I grew up with. But we respect and we encourage. In fact, Luther's explanation of this says we seek to help our neighbor, protect his reputation. And a ninth and 10th commandment that both deal with the idea of coveting. First, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. I always find this one an interesting one, given that at the time they were given this one, they lived in tents. But, you know, it's kind of one of those things that I scratch my head about. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his manservant, maidservant, his ox or donkey, and in case there's anything else out there or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. We're here for one another, not for one another's stuff or relationships or life. We live in respect and support. As much as our God is God with us, we live that out, the power of it, in our being with and for one another in our life together. In Deuteronomy, Moses refers time and time again to the law of the Lord. And he speaks about why the law was given. You know, because God just likes it's miserable. But Moses missed that one. I kind of like that one myself. But no, he said that it may be well with you. Over and over again, that phrase is woven through the book of Deuteronomy. As the people were about to enter the promised land. And maybe Moses knew they were going to be faced with all kinds of temptations there. And he reminded them of the law of the Lord. But he also reminded them it's God's vision for how to live in this world with him and with one another, that it may be well with you. So we speak with the psalmist who wrote 176 verses of Psalm 119. And we love the law of the Lord. The word of the Lord, as surely as his gospel is his word. His vision for us and his vision of walking with us in our life together, that it may be well with you. I hope you know how much God desires it to be well with you. It is his heart's desire, and it is a gift in Christ Jesus to bring us back into relationship with him, to restore to us this understanding, and to live in the wonder that God wants it and makes it well with our soul. Amen.